Sam raced along the racetrack at the speed of 240 miles an hour. He skidded on the turns. I gripped his seat with all my strength, and Sam yelled at me to jump out of the car right now. What? I am going to crash! Suddenly at the next turn, Sam abruptly slowed down. I hit my forehead on the glass. What the hell are you doing? Sam pressed the emergency door opening button. What did he want to do? God, I was going to fall out. He pushed me hard. I immediately flew out and felt like I hit something. Pain shot through my entire body. My vision darkened. I only had time to notice Sam's wild look, but I loved him for that look and passion for racing. We met at a race car show where I was doing a TV report. I loved racing since I was a kid, and I used to watch it with my dad every weekend. During the live broadcast, it suddenly began to rain and a strong wind rose. Then Sam, one of the best racers in the state, came up to me. He opened his umbrella over me and suggested that we go to lunch together. I was so happy, but I was still looking for some kind of trick in this. I never had any luck with guys, but Sam was so kind and had a brilliant sense of humor. At the end of the evening, I realized that I was beginning to fall in love. A week later, he asked me to move in with him. It was all like a happy dream. I couldn't believe that after all those assholes, I'd finally met someone normal. But I took a chance, packed up and moved in with Sam. On our first night together, we had a romantic dinner, but he looked worried and avoided eye contact. I tensed. Something happened. Sam said he had a confession to make, and he would understand if I decided to leave him after that. The excitement made me feel queasy. I was already prepared for him to tell me about his cheating, but Sam said something else. It turned out that he could not have children. At first, I couldn't believe my ears. I always dreamed of a baby. My eyes instantly filled with tears. I cried all night, and Sam just sat there and stroked my hair. This was very hard news. But I knew that no one had ever treated me so well, and although I dreamed of having a child, I understood that the most important thing was a happy relationship. After weighing everything up, I made a firm decision to stay with Sam. After all, the main thing was that we loved each other, and we could adopt a child. Tears welled up in Sam's eyes. He kept telling me that I would never regret being with him. And he confirmed it with actions. Sam made me breakfast every morning, took care of me, and gave me presents. I felt like the happiest girl in the world. As the major championship of the year approached, Sam spent more and more time training. I tried to support him, but he came home so tired and sullen. Once he even raised his voice at me. When I suggested that we go for a ride in the evening, I was so hurt. Besides, Sam never took me to the races with him, whereas the other racers always took their girlfriends. Maybe he was ashamed of me. Sam distanced himself from me every day, and I decided to take matters into my own hands. After all, what did he love most? Me and the race, so I needed to combine it. I arrived at the racetrack a few hours before the start of the competition. Sam was already here, drinking a milkshake by his sports car, and at the moment, I had an idea. I decided to get in the car to give him a real surprise. But Sam never left his car for a second. Damn it. Fortunately, not far away, I noticed some girls begging the guard to let them go to the race. What if I took out my ID, went to the guard, and said that these girls were my interns? The guard nodded, and the girls almost threw themselves on my neck with delight. Be quiet, please. I've got something for you to do. Do you see Sam the racer? You need to take more selfies with him. The girls looked at each other in bewilderment and immediately rushed to Sam. He never refused to take a selfie with his fans. While the girls were taking pictures, I was able to sneak to the car and climbed inside. I would never get used to how cramped it was. I barely hid behind the driver's seat, and just in time, Sam was already getting behind the wheel. I was looking forward to how happy he would be to have such a surprise. Except, damn, was he on his way to the racetrack already? Sam started to accelerate, and I heard him swear. The car did not accelerate to the maximum. It was because of me. My weight slowed everything down. There was no further delay. I scrambled out of my hiding place with a guilty face, and Sam swerved in surprise. We almost hit the fence. but he quickly pulled himself together and shouted that I was setting him up. He was going to lose because of my stupid trick. I was shaking, but what to do? In an icy tone, Sam said that he was going to slow down on the turn and at the moment, I would have to jump out of the car. Was this a joke? No, you're a jerk. I am going to crash. At that moment, Sam opened the door and pushed me out of the car with all of his strength. I woke up in a hospital room. God, I couldn't even feel my hands, and I couldn't move. All the events flashed in my head, and I felt so angry at Sam. I hated him. His race win was more important than my life. As luck would have it, the news was just being turned on in the ward, and suddenly I heard a familiar voice. Sam was on the screen. With a happy smile, he accepted congratulations for winning the race and was awarded a cash prize, $2 million. So he almost killed me for the money? I felt a mixture of powerlessness and anger. How dared he? And most importantly, how could I have believed his lies all this time? A nurse came into the room and told me that someone came to see me. I forcefully turned my head toward the door and saw Sam. What a jerk. You were so cocky to show face to me. Sam was standing with a huge bouquet of flowers, and suddenly he got down on one knee and begged for my forgiveness. Go away, please. The devices above my head began to beep sharply, and the doctor came immediately. He told Sam to get out of here right away. I couldn't be nervous right now. Sam left, but he did stop looking for a meeting. He passed gifts through nurses and notes with only the phrase, "Please listen to me." I felt bad just thinking about talking to him, but his persistence amazed me. All right, let him come. But what could he tell me? I certainly didn't expect what would happen next. Sam was in the room an hour later. Suddenly, he knelt down in front of my bed and took my hand. And then, looking into my eyes, he said that he had news. My stomach went cold. Sam said it was all about his ex-girlfriend, Caroline. Stop, so that was your news? Oh my god, are you two getting together? Sam looked down and said she was pregnant. By him. I couldn't believe it. How? I thought you couldn't have children. Sam started to stammer out that it was a 1 in a million chance, and he didn't believe it himself, but the DNA results confirmed it. To me, his words sounded like they were coming out of the water. But that wasn't all. It turned out that Caroline was seriously ill and needed a liver transplant, and her family had no money. If I don't help her, she'll die with a baby, Sam added in a whisper. That's why it was so important for him to get that money. I was stunned. Why didn't he just tell me everything? We could have worked something out, and now everything was destroyed. Sam kept saying that he didn't know how to tell me, because I probably would have left him right away after that, and he didn't want to lose me, but what you did only made it worse. Sam took my hand and whispered that if I didn't want to see him again, he would never come into my life again. I didn't have the strength to answer, so he left. And I lay there, gaze fixed at some point. Suddenly, I heard a child in the next room start laughing. It was like an electric shock. I realized that Sam had done the right thing by deciding to save his child. We needed to give the money immediately so that Caroline could have the surgery. With trembling hands, I texted Sam. Sam, I want you to be happy. Do everything you need to make sure that your baby is born healthy. I was discharged a week later, and Sam came to pick me up in his car to take me to another hospital, to where Caroline's surgery was taking place. I was still weak, but all I could think about was making sure the surgery was successful. The waiting was driving me crazy. I couldn't find a place for myself, and Sam was also very worried. But even in the state, he did not let go of my hand, repeating that everything would go well. 4 hours later, the doctor finally came out of the room. How is it going, doctor? His gaze made me pause. The doctor said they did everything they could, but they couldn't save Caroline. I felt like I was blacking out, but I just squeezed Sam's hand harder. Please hold on. Gathering my strength, I was able to ask only one question. What about the baby? The doctor said that the girl was now in intensive care and her condition was stable. I almost fainted in my excitement, but Sam caught me. He was stunned by the news and could not believe that he had become a father. After all, After his diagnosis, he did not dare to think about such a thing. I knew he was hurt by the news about Caroline, and I hugged him as hard as I could. At that moment, I leaned over to Sam and whispered that we wouldn't give the baby to anyone. Sam held me tight and told me how incredibly lucky he was to have a woman like me. I realized how important it is to be able to forgive, and now I have everything I dreamed of, a husband I love very much, and our dear baby. Did you like the video? Subscribe and like it. Support the channel. Thank you. I was so happy to finally meet Pete's parents. We were already approaching the house and his parents met us on the threshold. When I got a little closer, I could see their faces. Oh my god, they were the very people for whom I agreed to become a surrogate mother and bear their child. Of course, Pete didn't know anything. I had to do this to pay for my younger sister's treatment. Milana needed an emergency kidney transplant. The doctors promised to do their best. But I had to find the money. Our parents had long been dead. There was no one else to help. But the amount of money was huge. Where could I get that much? I was desperate. I spent all day looking out for the jobs and suddenly came across an ad finding a surrogate mother for an elderly couple. A lot of money was offered for this. It should be enough. I got tested, went through some procedures, and very soon, the doctor said, "You were pregnant." I couldn't believe it. I'd done it, but I was willing to do anything to save my sister. When my parents were gone, we were all alone and promised to help each other and stay together. I received a large amount in advance and immediately took the money to the clinic. I didn't tell my boyfriend Pete about anything. I was afraid he would leave me right away, so he didn't notice. I had to lie that I was going out of town for a year, preparing for college. It seemed he believed it. Pete was my first love. I wanted to marry him, and now he introduced me to his parents. It was so exciting. So much for an acquaintance. Who would have thought that I was carrying a child for them? In a panic, I told Pete that I got food poisoning, turned around and ran home. Suddenly the phone rang. It was Pete. I prepared for the worst, but he said that he understood that it had to be exciting to meet the parents of the future husband. Then he added that probably today was not the best option to get acquainted. They recently had a big fight with him because he always hung out until late and his parents were worried and slept badly. After that, Pete offered to help me move out of town, but I insisted that I could handle it myself. The next day, I moved all my things to the country house. As soon as I unpacked, I felt like I already missed Pete, but I checked myself. As long as he didn't find out about my pregnancy, it was the only way I could save our relationship. I had just laid down on the sofa with my book when the doorbell rang. Who was it? In my confusion, I opened the door and saw Pete with a huge suitcase. Pete said he had understood that he wanted to live with me and he wouldn't disturb my getting ready for college. I didn't know what to say. Any girl in my position would have been happy, but I was terrified. He would soon find out about my pregnancy. Nervous, I tried to say that he would be bored here. There was no clubs, no parties, but Pete said not to worry. His friends would be able to come by car. And tonight, there was going to be the first party in honor of housewarming. I was ready to cry. But I decided to tell Pete to go to town right after the party. I needed to be here alone. When the guests were assembled, Pete offered to drink to the hostess. All eyes turned to me. I could barely contain my excitement. I was not allowed to drink alcohol. Nervous, I asked for some water. Pete impatiently responded that he hadn't noticed my craving for a healthy lifestyle before. Then Archie, his best friend, came up to me. I'd only seen him a couple of times before, but I knew everyone thought he was a good guy. And Archie had water in his glass too. He said that for a good mood and fun, you didn't have to drink. But then Pete chimed in and said he knew how to keep me from moping. He brought my favorite Indian food with him. But the smell of the curry made me feel sick, and I immediately ran to the toilet. When I got back, Pete said angrily, "What's wrong with you?" I hesitated and he just turned around and went back to his guests. This was definitely not the time to talk about how I wanted to be alone. Pete was already angry with me, but the right moment to send Pete off didn't come. As days went by, my stomach continued to grow and my hormones turned my mood into a roller coaster. One morning, I woke up in a terrible state. My legs were swollen and it hurt to touch my breasts. And then I saw a missed message on my phone. It was from Pete.
don't forget, it's my parents' wedding anniversary. Call is at 7 p.m. I hope this time the acquaintance will happen. Damn, I promised to go there. Now I definitely couldn't get away with it. So I needed to make sure they didn't recognize me. In desperation, I put on an old stretch-out sweater. I tied a handkerchief over my head and put on sunglasses. Pete came back and glared at me. Was I going to wear this? But I hastily replied that there was no time to change. Pete's parents were looking at each other strangely all through dinner. Did they recognize me after all? And in the end, his mother said that they had good news. Soon, they would have a child. Pete was taken aback. He didn't understand how this was possible at her age. But his mother stammered out that they had found an excellent surrogate mother and she was already carrying his future brother or sister. So they didn't realize it was me. And then Pete remarked with a chuckle that only idiots would agree to carry someone else's child for money. What did he understand? I screamed that he was wrong and barely holding back my tears, I ran out into the street. Pete caught up with me and told me that he was finally tired of my whims. You know, we'd better separate and take a break from each other, he said. What? Pete added that he wanted to stay with his friend Archie, the guy from the party, for a week. It hurt me to hear that, but maybe it was even better. Because if we broke up, Pete wouldn't see my stomach grow. At home, Pete packed up his things and left immediately. Archie was waiting for him outside the house. I went to take a bath to relax. Then I heard a noise in the hallway. Was Pete back? All my things were in the bedroom. He was going to see my stomach. I threw on a robe and decided to sneak into the living room. Holding my breath, I tried to move as quietly as possible, but I could hardly move my swollen legs. And then I saw Archie, that friend of Pete's, standing in front of me, stunned. He awkwardly explained that Pete had forgotten his t-shirt and asked him to pick it up so he wouldn't have to see me. He looked down at my stomach. It was perfectly visible under the robe. Hell, he was going to tell Pete now. I felt dizzy with fear, and I started to fall. Archie immediately ran to me and helped me sit down on the sofa. Tears welled up in my eyes. Archie, I didn't mean to deceive anyone. And then I told him that I was carrying someone else's child to save my sister. After that, Archie stared at one point for a long time and was silent. I shouldn't have laughed. But then he said that the words had made him shiver. He said that if something happened to his loved one, he would also do everything to help. Then Archie noticed that my legs were very swollen. He said that when his mother was pregnant with his little brother, he often massaged her, and he offered to help me. I was taken aback, but agreed. My legs really hurt wildly, and just as Archie started massaging me, I heard, "What's taking Archie so long?" And suddenly Pete was in the room. In a rage, he shouted that he wasn't the least bit surprised that I was already cheating on him. "Pete, wait! You got it wrong!" I thought the world had collapsed. What would happen now? I kept calling Pete for the next week, but it seemed he banned me. I was in a terrible state, but I knew that I needed to pull myself together, at least for the sake of my sister Milana. I tried to get out of bed, and then I heard footsteps downstairs. Pete? But it was Archie. He brought me a whole bag of fruit. I asked him about Pete. Was he still mad at me? Then Archie took my hand and told me that I didn't need Pete. Everything would be fine and Archie would take care of me. But Pete just got it wrong. I didn't cheat on him. I was only carrying a baby for my sister, and it had been so long since I had visited her in the hospital. And suddenly Archie said, "Then what are you waiting for? Let's go." I was sad to think that Pete had never been so interested in her. Pete would always say, "You need to switch," and invite me to another party. I agreed, and Archie and I went to the hospital, and only when I entered the room, I saw that my little sister finally came to her senses. But the doctor, standing next to Milana's bed, told me not to be too happy. Milana's condition was unstable, and the new organ might not establish, but the main thing was, she was already awake. Archie and I visited Milana almost every day. Everything seemed to be going well. She was rapidly getting better. At first, I was a little worried about how my sister would accept Archie, but it seemed that they quickly got along. They spent hours together discussing comics and drawing superhero makeup. I was so happy. I was surprised to see that I seemed to be getting attached to Archie too. We were on our way back from the hospital one day, and Archie asked me to stop by for dinner at a cafe. I hesitated because this was Pete's favorite place. I didn't know what to do, but I thought the whole Pete thing was in the past, and I agreed to go there anyway. As soon as we ordered, Archie, embarrassed, said that he had been very fond of me for a long time. I was confused, but Archie added that there was no way he could admit it. Because of Pete, I felt my cheeks flush. And at that moment, I saw Pete enter the cafe. He had his arm around some blonde girl. How dare he? Then I got a message on my phone. It was from the hospital. The doctor wrote that the kidney still did not establish, and Milana urgently needed a new donor. I tried to get up, and suddenly I felt that my water seemed to break. The ground dropped away under my feet again, and I fell into the darkness. I woke up in the hospital. Archie was nowhere to be found, and neither was the baby. What about Milana? God, what's going on? But then the door swung open, and Pete's parents came in, cheering, clutching a small baby bundle to their chest. The doctor also handed me some kind of superhero badge. It was Milana's favorite badge. What did it mean? The doctor said that my sister had already recovered from the second surgery and even asked to pass me this badge as a sign of gratitude. I didn't understand anything. We made it? When did they find a donor? The doctor looked at me in surprise and said that it was my friend who gave his kidney. Archie? The doctor looked at the chart and nodded. Tears streamed down my cheeks. A month later, Milana, Archie, and I went to the ocean. I looked at the waves and thought how great it was when the difficulties were in the past. And now there was a new happy life ahead of the three of us. I turned to Archie and said, "Thank you, Archie. You're my superhero." Milana smiled cheerfully. By the way, the girl I gave birth to was named Milana. We sometimes visit her with the whole family. Did you like the video? Subscribe and like it. Support the channel. Thank you.